Today we're going to be installing our power steering relocation bracket from Twin Sticks Technologies. Now the original power steering was mounted in this location over here, and you might need to move it out to gain a little bit of extra space over here. In our case, we've installed a TST or Twin Sticks Technologies dual battery box in this location, but you might also want to put a onboard air compressor in this location. Either way, you're going to need to move your power steering reservoir, and this guide is going to detail how to install your Twin Sticks Technology power steering reservoir relocation bracket. Before we get started, let's just go through the contents of this kit. We have a pack of fasteners, hose clamps and washers. We obviously have the new bracket, and then we do have the two hoses that you're going to need to connect up the reservoir to the power steering pump. Now these hoses are a little bit longer than what you need, so feel free to cut them to the length that you need once you have the installation done. Now, in order to actually mount the reservoir onto this bracket, you have two options. The first one is to reuse the metal section and weld it onto this bracket, and we'll detail how to do that. Alternatively, you would have ordered the nylon mounting, which will look like this, and if you did, that will be included in your kit. So just something to note with these long nuts that are in the kit. The initial design had one of them that was slightly longer. I have redesigned the kit, and we have been able to bring this down to 3 of the same. So if any mention is made of a longer one or shorter ones, just ignore that. You're just going to use any one of these 3 long nuts. So there are 2 ways to actually mount the power steering tank to the new bracket. The first one is to reuse this mounting that is on the original bracket and relocate it to this one. Now, I like this option because it makes use of steel, and I have a preference to using steel. The other alternative is actually just to bolt on this nylon bracket here to the new mounting. We're going to discuss both ways so that you can make your own decision as to which way you would prefer. And in order to install this bolt-on bracket, what you will do is you'll turn this whole thing over, and you'll take the 4 bolts that come with the kit, and then you will install them into these locations. Like that. And then, of course, go ahead and tighten these bolts down using a wrench so that you have a complete bracket that looks like that. Right, so what I've got to do is take out these 4 spot welds. I'm going to just punch a pilot hole right in the middle of each spot weld, and then I'll just go and drill each one of these out with the drill until the spot weld separates. So punched each one out. I'm going to go ahead now and drill those holes out, and then I'll be able to separate this bracket from the bottom part, relocate it to where we need, and then I'll just weld it back into place again. Right, so there we go. We've removed this part that mounts the power steering reservoir from the bracket itself. Now, in order to mount this power steering mount onto the new bracket, you're going to use these 2 holes for alignment. And in this bracket over here, you will see that there are actually 2 pinholes which you will place into that position. That should give you your alignment. Now, what I suggest you do is that you actually clamp this on using a clamp like I've done over here. Place it into the Lexus and make sure that the alignment is correct and that you're happy with the location. Then use a scribe and scribe around where the bracket is going to sit on this one over here. And then use a grinder and just grind off the powder coating so that you have a good clean place to make your weld. And then go ahead and weld this bracket on like I've done over here onto this new bracket there. Before you can install this bracket into the Lexus, what we need to do is remove these old rubber mounts from your original bracket. So the easiest way to do that is just to grab a screwdriver and take these little steel inserts and just press down on the inserts until they pop out the back. And once they are out enough, you can just pop them out. And we're going to do that for all 3 of these over here. So just push them down until they pop out. Right, once you've got all three of these inserts out, you need to remove this rubber bushing, and you do that by pressing the rubber bushing flat and then rolling it through the opening. So you're just going to do that with all three bushes and roll them out like this, press it flat and roll it through the opening. Great stuff. So now we can put your old bracket to one side, and you're going to grab the new bracket and we're going to reinstall the rubber bushes. Now you install the bushes the same way you took them out. You're going to put them into the opening, push them flat and roll them into position. And give them a press so that they become more or less round. And you're going to repeat that for each of these locations. Right, now the rubber bushes are now in place. Right, once you have those bushes installed, you're just going to take these metal rings and install them back in again. Now they could be a bit tight, but just a gentle squeeze will pop them back in. If they really are tight, a little bit of soap or some assembly lube will help pop them back in again. You're going to get those all seated back in their positions. Right, so depending on whether you chose to use this bracket or the original one, our mounting is now ready to go and pop it back into the LX. So before we get started, let's just talk about access to do this work. You're going to need to be mounting off those holes over there, and then you're going to need to be routing hoses down to your power steering pump, which is down there. So it's going to be easier if you remove your airbox. You've got to undo this clamp, undo this connector over here. There's a bolt down there, a bolt down there, and a bolt down there. And with a little bit of force, you can push this box back and remove it out. I'm not going to do that for this video because I'm not going to have to get all the way down there, but it's going to be easier for you to do this with the airbox out the way. Now, if you are installing this power steering relocation bracket, you're probably going to want to have access to this area over here. So taking out the airbox certainly will make it easier to access there, and I would go ahead and remove the airbox before you continue. So underneath here, we're going to be using this nut and this nut. Now what I suggest you do is you grab your bolt and you run it through from the top to the bottom to clean out these threads before you get started. Right, now that we've run those two bolts in from the top, we're going to go and remove them, and then we're going to actually insert them from the bottom up to form studs at the top. Right, the other hole that you're going to be using is this one over here. Now, because we can't change those two nuts, if you do need to make any adjustments to mount this bracket, you're going to need to drill out or adjust this hole over here. So make sure that you are able to find that hole and locate it. You certainly can use the bracket from the top to find out where this hole is, but this is going to be your adjustment hole over here. Right, now that we've got those two bolts in, we can come in from the top. We're going to place a washer on each one of those studs over there. And then you're going to take the two short nuts and install them onto the studs and run them most of the way down. These two are fixed in location, so you can just tighten them up for now by hand. And then once you're done, just grab a socket and do the final tightening. Right, so in this hole over here, we're going to use just a bolt that's going to come through from the bottom, and then one of the spacers on the top. Okay, so torque up those two over there, and then leave this one loose for now, because as I mentioned earlier, this is where your adjustability is. So just a note on how to put these joints together. You want to transfer load through that metal spacer. So the way to do it is to install a washer on each side of the bolt before you install the bolt into the vehicle. So just make sure that you've got this stacked with a washer on each side of the rubber when you install this into the LX. So getting all these fasteners in can be a bit fiddly. The secret really is to make sure that this bolt is not tight, that it is loose, that long nut at the back, and then you can go ahead and start all of those threads. Once you've got them all started, you can now go ahead and tighten these up, and then when you're finished, you're going to tighten that bolt in from underneath the wheel well as the last step. So the way that I undid the system was to undo the clamp that's over there and then pull this hose backwards. Now once again, it's pretty tight to get it undone, but what you do is you put a pliers on, you allow the hose to rotate on the fitting, and then you can pull the fitting off. Just be aware that a whole bunch of oil is going to pour out when you do that, and so you need to have a catch can at the bottom of the car to catch it. I just used an old oil pan and drained the fluid out into the old oil pan. Now if you haven't modified your power steering system, you're likely to have a spring clamp on that fitting down there. And the best tool that I know to undo it is a proper spring clamp pliers, like this one over here. This tool has a cup on one end to seat, and on the other side it has a slot. What you do is you place the spring clamp in there, and then you can actually compress it, and it will compress your spring clamp, and you can slide it backwards. Now if you don't have a proper spring clamp pliers, what you can do is just take a regular pliers, and you just need to be a little bit more careful and slide the spring clamp backwards. If it has been modified already and you have a worm clamp on it, like I have down there, you're just going to use your screwdriver and undo the worm clamp. Now the reinstall will use a worm clamp because it's much easier to get in there with a long screwdriver than what it is with this pliers. We've completed the relocation of the power steering fluid reservoir to this location over here. What I have done is I've installed a new 5/8 suction line, which I will clip down in that position over there. Right, so the 3/8 line runs from the tank back to this connector over here. Now, I've chosen to put an inline filter in there. That's my choice. You don't have to do that. You can just run the hose directly from there back to that fitting over there. Right, and that's it. Once you've done, make sure that the tangs of the tank are aligned with the tangs of the bracket over there, and that you slide that down. And your tank should be fairly well mounted, and that's it. You have successfully relocated your power steering fluid tank.
Before you start the Lexus, you need to bleed the power steering system. So what I did was jack up the front end until the wheels were off the ground, then make sure that the reservoir was full of fluid, and turn the steering wheel full lock left and full lock right with the engine off. I did that a couple of times, just topping up the reservoir until I could see no more air escaping. Then you can start the engine and do the same thing, full lock left and full lock right, until there's no more air escaping in the power steering reservoir.